I was so embarrassed to be Asian. I was so embarrassed to be Korean. I was so tired of people pulling their eyes back and saying like horrible things to me. And being adopted kind of made it easier for me to believe that I was white, that I was American. It took me so long to be proud that I would never want someone to feel that way. At the end of the day, like, you're not going to change who you are. Like, this is inevitably who you are. It's so hurtful to be ashamed of that.
Welcome to The Tiger in the Room. My name is Hannah, and I'll be your host. We are a podcast series that is here to talk about the current and ongoing national crisis of anti-Asian hate crimes. A lot of us first heard about anti-Asian hate in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that hate against Asians and Asian Americans is not just seen in acts of violence. It is also seen when our community is silenced, invisibilized, and erased. We plan to talk about the challenges that modern-day Asian Americans face every day, whether it's in the workplace, in public, in media, and so on. We also talk to the organizers, activists, and change makers who are fighting for our community and fighting for change. We hope you'll join us. Our guest today is Kimberly Byrne, a Korean-Adoptee and anti-Asian hate activist who is also the founder of an organization called Stronger Together. Stronger Together is a New York City and New Jersey-based nonprofit that sells clothing designed by Kim, with all proceeds going to local community organizations that support AAPI, BLM, Latinx, and LGBTQ+ communities. We talked to Kim about the story behind the brand, as well as her personal story as an adoptee, and how the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes has affected her as a Korean American. This interview with Kimberly Byrne was recorded on November 11th, 2022. Today, we have a very special guest with us today, Kimberly Byrne. She and I have connected actually through Instagram. We just had a lot of, I think, really similar viewpoints on what was happening back in 2020 and 2021 with Stop Asian Hate. And, you know, especially as an Asian woman, it's always really inspiring and empowering to see other Asian women speaking up and, you know, just fighting the good fight. So we're very excited to have Kimberly here with us today. And she's also the founder of a nonprofit organization called Together We Are Stronger. Together We Are Stronger creates these really beautifully designed apparel. Some of you guys may have seen it. It has all these different Asian ethnicities listed on the back, and these ethnicities spell out the word American. And I think it's just a very strong visual reminder that that is really what Asian American is. You know, we come from a lot of different countries, but when we're here, we all fall under this umbrella of being Asian American. So Kimberly is the founder, and all the proceeds from her organization goes to support other organizations that support causes like Black Lives Matter and Stop Asian Hate. So Kimberly, welcome to the podcast. Very excited you're here. Let's just get into it. You know, we've talked a lot on social media, but I don't think we've really had a chance to dig too much into, you know, who we are and what our stories are as people. So I want to start with that. You know, I want to hear your story. You know, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
Well, if you had 5 hours and 3 bottles of wine, we could go through my entire life story. But for today, I was actually born in Korea, and I was adopted when I was 6 months old into an American family. My family is white. I do have a younger brother and a younger sister. They're biological to my adoptive parents. That being said, they are the only family I've ever known. Like, my mom is the only person I've ever called mom, similar to with my dad and my brother and sister. We grew up in northern New Jersey. If you've ever seen the Jersey Shore, that's pretty much where we grew up. A lot of Italian Americans congregate there. And it was interesting growing up because I was one of maybe 5 Asians total in my regional high school. So it was 4 towns, and I was maybe one of 5. And then from there, I went to college in South Orange. I went to Seton Hall University. And then I worked a wide array of odd jobs, anywhere from restaurants to ice cream shops. I worked at a YMCA as a swim coach. I did do a stint with professional sports. I worked for the NBA and for the Devils hockey team in New Jersey. And then when I was 26, I moved to Korea. And so I didn't do any research. I kind of just wanted to go and figure it out. I did have this like idea that I was just going to fit right in. And that's not what happened at all. And it was supposed to be like a 1 year thing. I was going to go teach English and then come home. And I ended up staying for close to 8 years. And they were probably some of the best years that I've ever had.
I've always just been very curious. You hear from different stories about adoptees, how some adoptees grow up feeling very, racially conscious of the fact that they're not white, that they don't fit in with their families, or, they sort of don't notice it as much. They accept their families. What was the role of race for you growing up? Being Asian and having like a white family, how conscious were you of it? And, how do you think that affected you?
So I did ask my parents this probably about 15 years ago if they ever told me that I was adopted. And they said that we did have a conversation about it. I personally don't remember. I was probably quite young when we had that conversation. And so I didn't really realize that I didn't look the same, probably until I was 11 or 12. I think that's when I kind of looked around and was like, wow, I'm a lot darker. My eyes are different. All of my features were different. Right. And so I had a very roller coastery journey with growing up in this kind of environment. I'm going to say, generally speaking, I think that kids are mean. I don't think they mean to be mean, but they say things that they hear at home, or like generations now, they have so much access to YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, all of that social media that I didn't have when I was younger. And so I think a lot of race-based or ethnicity-based jokes that I did encounter as a kid, I don't think that they were malintended. I just think that that's what they knew, and that's what they regurgitated. I'm not going to say that it didn't hurt my feelings, but I don't think that it hurt as much as it does at my age now. And so it was a lot of racially based jokes when I was younger. And then as I got older into high school and college, it was like, well, now I'm seen as very smart. And so everyone wanted to like get my math homework or be my science partner. I remember distinctly when I was in college, like everyone just wanted to work with me for our statistics project, and because mine was done. And it's not because I like tried harder. That was just something. There is a stereotype that Asians, especially East Asians, are good at math and science. And I just fell into that. I didn't really try. It just kind of happened. And so that was like a higher quote unquote like point of being Asian. Right. And so then that changed as well when I moved to Korea, and I was like, yes, I'm going to be around all of these Koreans. But if anyone knows anything about Korean culture, I am like the worst Korean there possibly could be. I'm short. I am not the size of a toothpick. I'm dark, which is very, very frowned upon. My Korean is not that great. I have tattoos, and, I'm very Americanized and very Westernized. And so being that way about 10 years ago in Korea, as progressive as they may seem with like now, right, with all the K-pop and how popular Korean culture is now, it was not the case about 10 years ago. And so then I kind of went through, I guess for all intents and purposes, an identity crisis, because here in America, I was not fully accepted as American because of the way that I look. And in Korea, I was not ever fully accepted as Korean because of all the before mentioned things. And so I kind of felt like sometimes I still feel this way. Like I'm in a limbo. I don't really know. Like I'm very comfortable around other Korean Americans, but I get very nervous when I have to meet their family or their parents who are like Korean, because I care about what I look like. And I would say living in Korea, that took a huge toll on me. I've battled an eating disorder since I was 12, and in Korea, it like reared its head again. And because everyone else around you looks a certain way, And then people start to ask you like, oh, are you sick? And I'm like, no, I'm just not wearing any makeup. And so I became very obsessive about like physically how I looked, which was completely unhealthy. Like, I don't wish that upon anybody. But it is something that exists that I think is not rarely, or I think it's rarely talked about. I'm not sure if you watched that Blackpink documentary on Netflix.
I actually did but like a long time ago. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that K-pop groups are severely glamorized, right? It takes a lot of nurturing is the wrong word. They are coached from a very young age. And so their entire life is regulated. Like they have cameras everywhere to make sure they're not sneaking in snacks. A lot of Koreans are bulimic. And these are like the hard truths and like the dark truths that aren't in the public eye, because physically everything that comes out of Korea is just so perfect and porcelain and beautiful. And I don't think people outside of our culture like understand all of the work and things that go behind the scenes.
Definitely. Prior to moving to Korea though, like how aware were you of these like facets of Korean culture? Because you're absolutely on the money there. Did you learn all that while you were in Korea and you observed it there?
I did not know anything about my culture at all prior to going. I was not raised with it at all. The first time I had Korean food was from one of my swim clients, and they went to Fort Lee. They brought me back some food when I was 25. So I had not experienced anything Korean until then. And this is something that I've been dealing with for the past like couple of years, because I feel a lot of resentment towards my family because I was not brought up with my culture. I also have to keep in mind that in the early 80s, when I was adopted, it wasn't like today. I have like an inkling that if I were adopted in today's society, you could not raise a child without bringing their native culture to them or bringing it up around them. And so I honestly didn't know very much about it at all, like anything really outside of America, to be honest, which is mildly embarrassing.
Well, first, I think it's really admirable that even in your 20s, like you strove to learn and embrace it. And now it's like, it is who you are, you claimed it for yourself. I mean, I'm sure that wasn't easy either. And, knowing Korean people, I feel like we tend to be very harsh and judgmental on people who are Korean, but aren't good Koreans. I think you put that really perfectly. As a Korean American, I think we sometimes don't even realize how diverse the Korean American community is, or how diverse the Korean American experience is. Like there are a lot of adoptees, for example. But I feel like those groups tend to be very separated from each other, or if you're like biracial Korean, or if you're, 1.5, like even generally racially, I think it's pretty divided, versus, 1.5 versus second versus first. To a degree, I think we all have an awareness of some of the not so great things about our culture, like you said, like this idea of like being a good Korean versus a bad Korean, right? And I think it's great that like K-pop and K-dramas have really changed how the West has viewed Korean culture. But I also tell my friends all the time, I'm like, yeah, that's Korean culture, but it's not something like I know personally very well because I didn't grow up in Korea. Like, I really spent, most of my life like here. So I can't speak to what is in the dramas and, how they operate. And like K-pop idols, they don't look like people like me, like, but that's who they people think Korean and they think of Blackpink or they think of BTS. And I'm just like, nobody I grew up with looked like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, I think to be Korean American, a Korean American specifically, not like a Korean person from Korea, I feel like it's been like a very interesting journey to see how, like I said, like 10, 20 years ago, Korean culture, Korean anything was just not really on anyone's radar, but now it is. But it's a very particular type of, Korean culture and Korean representation that I don't think, shows everything, just to be polite about it. Okay, so you went to Korea and you spent 8 years there, and then you came back. So what did you do after you came back from Korea?
So before I came back, I went on a 10 country, 2-month world round like trip, which was really eye opening. I really enjoy traveling. I love to experience other countries, other cultures. I also like to travel like a local, which not always the greatest or fastest way to get anywhere, but I think it gives you the full experience and it grounds you. It makes you really grateful for everything that you have. If there was anything that I learned that I already knew it, but once you experience anything outside of here, Americans are very spoiled. And I thought I knew what poverty looked like until I saw the other side of the world. And I'm not negating or taking away from the fact that we do have, poverty here and like a terrible homeless situation. I do understand that. I see it every day going to work. But it's different outside of the US. And I think that people who live here who don't have that opportunity or that chance to get out, if they ever do, they should take it. It will humble you, and I hope it gives you a different perspective, like it did to me. I'm very fortunate to have been able to do that. But I knew that when I came back, I wanted to teach. I knew that I wanted to be in underfunded, under-resourced communities. And the reason that is because I never had a teacher growing up who looked like you or me. I didn't have teachers of color. I didn't even have a teacher who was probably under the age of 50, if we're being completely honest. And so, I think that's what we needed. I'm not sure if anyone else our age would feel similarly, but I feel like that's what I needed. And so I strive to be the teacher that I always needed, but never had. And so because I grew up the way I grew up and I've surrounded myself with people from all walks of life, there are hard conversations that I have with my students. My families are very well aware that we are going to have those hard conversations. As an educator of Black and Brown children, they're going to face challenges at a much younger age and at a faster rate. And if they are old enough to see controversial things on social media, because they already are, then they're old enough to have a conversation about it. And their family is their first teacher. I'll never take that away from them. But if they ask me a question, I'm going to give them an honest answer. And I think they need to be told the truth, because as someone who went through the education system here, I feel like I was lied to for all of it, in terms of history and how we learn it and what we learn. And I think that 99% of the history that we learn in schools is told from a white male lens. And that's not accurate in all cases, right? And so we want to play up that America is like this great force. We're the greatest country in the world. We're wealthy. We're this and that. But how did you get there? And that story is overtaken by, we had this love story between Europeans and Pilgrims and Native Americans. That's not what happened, right? And so as a person, I just don't feel right to continue that lie, to continue that fabrication. And I think that this generation, or like, I guess the teachers that I'm very privileged to work with, we all, our values are aligned. And it's an honor actually to be able to teach the kids this like information that I wasn't taught.
I agree with you. Education is probably the only tool that we have to teach the next generation. That just resonates with me because as an Asian American, I was never taught Asian American history either. I mean, there was maybe like 2 sentences on the Japanese internment camps when we studied about World War II, but didn't know anything about, really how, the Chinese, when they came here, for example, how they were basically lynched like in the 80s,
right,
and worked on the railroads. And, there's a lot of history that's missing. I agree with that. It's very skewed. When you talk to your students about race, though, what are those conversations like? Because, I can imagine that can go a lot of different ways. But when you have like those hard conversations, like what do you talk to them about? And especially with being an Asian American yourself, like, do you bring like your personal perspective into it?
Yes. Earlier this year, in March, was the 1-year anniversary of the Atlanta spa shootings. And at my last job, I actually took the day off. I was volunteering. And so the following day I'd come in and the kids had asked me why I wasn't there. And I told them, we try not to talk about violence, right? So, we've just, I didn't dumb it down for them. I just use alternative words. I think they understood what happened. And so they asked me why that happened. And I was very clear and very honest with them. And I said, there are some people in this country who don't like people that look like me just because of the face that I have. And their response was, that's not right. That's not fair. And I said, you're not wrong. And at the same time, we had also touched upon George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. We had gone out to protests and rallies together as a school. And so they asked if it was kind of similar to that. And I said, yes. People of color are targeted in this country. And you and we are those people of color. And so it is a touchy subject, but it's something that I would say probably recently, like 4 or 5 years ago, was not comfortable talking about. But again, going through the last 2 or 3 years here, it's part of the conversation. You're going to be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. And I think that we just need to kind of like normalize that. If you're uncomfortable, then that's something that you need to deal with internally. And I think the crowd of people that say, well, this doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to talk about it, I'm not going to care about it, that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous and harmful to our communities. And I've had uncomfortable conversations with my own family about it because they weren't aware of their white privilege. And I gave them a very simple example. You will never have to have a conversation with your kids about what to do when they get pulled over. That's just something you're never going to have to do. You will have to have other conversations regarding, going out and whatever else when they get older. But in terms of like racial privilege, you'll never have to have that conversation. Mm-hmm. And they didn't even realize it because they're born with it.
I can imagine that must have been a really hard conversation too, because it's your family, right? And it's almost like, how do you even have that conversation with your own family about an experience that they have and you don't, right? Like to have white privilege. I'm glad you brought that up, the part about, denying when this is happening. And I think we both agree on the fact that there's quite a few folks like that in the Asian community who, I don't know how else to say it. I mean, they just don't really seem very affected by what's been happening since 2020. And, these hate crimes haven't stopped either, right? They're still continuing. We just don't hear about it as much because the media has sort of gotten bored of it. But it always just still amazes me when I, talk to another Asian American who knows what's going on, but they're just kind of like, yeah, but, what are you going to do about it? There's just like so much apathy. And, I hate to characterize people in our community like that, but I think it's a serious problem. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a very accurate way to describe it. And I'm not sure if it's because they assume that other people will take care of it, because I think a lot of people do that. Like a lot of people won't vote. Yeah. Like a lot of people won't vote because they're just going to assume that other people will make up the votes for them. Right. I think another part of it is traditionally, and I'm only speaking from, Korean culture, you just keep your head down. You keep your head down. You don't say anything, especially if you're a woman, you just keep it moving. And I think in some, maybe most East Asian countries, as any, like I can't speak for, South Asians or the Middle East, but a lot of East Asian cultures and countries, that's their viewpoint as well. You're just going to keep your head down and you keep quiet, because it's almost as if you don't want to cause a disturbance, right? You just kind of want to come in, do what you have to do, fly under the radar and collect a paycheck, essentially. Right. And I feel like that's the immigrant mentality. That's part of it. You don't want to risk saying something controversial, posting something maybe off color because you're afraid of what that consequence might look like. And so I think a lot of the silence or the apathy that you were talking about stems from those two things.
I totally agree with that. As you were saying that, I remember I had a conversation about this with a friend who, she's pretty vocal like me, but mainly on social media. And we were just like so frustrated by this, because there was a point when you see the news coming out, another Asian got attacked, another Asian got attacked, another elder. And it's just like a deafening silence from our community. And we were just like, what's up with that? Why are people just not more incensed? And basically what you said, she's like, we have a mentality where we want to avoid confrontation. We want to avoid trouble, but we're also very practical minded. Meaning like, I just think Asians have this view. They just want to take the course of action that's just going to lead to the most efficient outcome. And I don't think that they view protesting or speaking up or, risking their jobs or their time to speak up on Asian hate as being effective or it's going to lead to anything. So when you combine those two, you just have people who are going to avoid the most difficult path forward, if that makes sense. Like they're just going to avoid it completely. But that's not how change happens, right? Change doesn't happen because you take the easier way or you just kind of wait for things to blow over. Like that's just going to actually come back and bite you in the face because these things are continuing to happen. Like these hate crimes are still continuing to happen and it's not being addressed and people are not really taking it seriously. So, you teach a lot of students of color. You teach in Harlem, which is a very historically a Black neighborhood in New York. And Black Asian relations, that's a topic that I think we hear come up a lot. And, as someone who has, views into both communities, right? Because this is what you do for a living and, being Asian American yourself, I'm just curious, what do you think both communities can do to better understand each other? Because we have a lot more in common than not. But I think we are also very divided when we don't need to be.
From a Korean perspective, a Korean American perspective, not only are Koreans very judgy, in my personal experience here and in Korea, I would also say that Koreans are on the racist side. And that's probably not something that I should be saying. I'm not trying to put a damper on, the blow up that is Korean culture now, but it's also very real. And so I am unsure of where that racism stems from. But I've also seen it in the Chinatown community in Manhattan. And I think honestly, where that fear comes from is media. Because the media is so much about the headlines, so much about the clickbait, so much about the likes and the views, they're going to put out a narrative that is quote unquote interesting to people, interesting to their readers, right? And so instead of it saying that there was a mentally ill person who did X, Y, and Z, it was a Black man who pushed an Asian woman in the subway. That's what it is. And until you dig into the article, until you actually check all the facts, that's all the information that you know. And I think that's part of the problem. I don't think that's the entire problem. I also think that people in general just have a fear of the unknown. And Asian people are very set in their ways, right? And I don't think that they like change. They don't adapt to change that well. And the generation I'm speaking of is the older generations, most likely 60 and older. I don't know if you would agree with that, but I think a lot of it, or some of it, is fear of the unknown. I think it's also, again, the news, the things that they see on TV. I don't know how many elderly people are on social media. Maybe they do see some things here and there on Instagram or on the internet. And I think at the height of the Stop Asian Hate / Black Lives Matter movements in 2020 and 2021, I think there started to be conversations around solidarity. And unfortunately, I think that those conversations stopped. And I can't speak as to why, but I think they need to continue. I also think that the narrative it needs to come from us, right? And it needs to come from all sides. So if the media is not going to put out the narrative that's accurate, then we need to do that. And I guess the question now is, how do we do that? And so different organizations that I've volunteered with, I know that they have, like running to protest. They had a Black and Asian solidarity run that I was a part of. And even though it was a run and, like there weren't like cameras everywhere and whatever, I think that it does start with community, because essentially as you said before, like we all fall under this American community, and we need to have those conversations.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I think dialogue is needed. It's not there right now. And I mean, if it is, I don't know. I don't know, what's being talked about in those conversations and who's having those conversations too. I was raised by Korean immigrant parents and grandparents, and I agree. Koreans can be very racist, very judgmental. I mean, it's very well known. There's like a pattern of behavior with Korean store owners in especially underrepresented neighborhoods in, cities like LA and New York, where there was a lot of tension with, their Black customer base and the business owners. But sometimes I kind of wonder, because I know that obviously when you come from a culture that doesn't really fit in with the mainstream, right? Like as Korean, for example, as one thing that I hear a lot from the Black communities is when it comes to being the way they're treated in Korean stores or Korean establishments, the fact that they don't make eye contact with you, or the fact that, they don't give you customer service. That is cultural, right? I mean, I don't deny like part of it is maybe they don't like the person, but I've also definitely experienced that at other immigrant establishments. Like I've been to Chinese restaurants where like there's no customer service there. You know what I mean? It's just like eat and get out, right? And in Korean culture, it's generally not considered respectful to look at someone directly in the eye. It's always, it's about coming off as more humble and subservient. But in this country, that doesn't get interpreted in a positive way. That kind of understanding of like where we come from, like Korean people, I don't really feel is there sometimes when I hear what's being said on the other side. And I'm not saying that to justify what happened to, Black people who did get mistreated by Korean store owners. But I sometimes feel like, well, if you want to have solidarity, it has to be a two-way conversation, right? Like it can't just be, and very rarely in conflicts is it just one person's fault, right? I mean, that might be a bit controversial for me to say, but I think that there are things that, both sides can acknowledge that have done wrong to each other. And we're not talking, we don't want to compare either, like who is worse or whatever. I think there's been mutual like misunderstanding and mutual, distrust and harm that's been done. But it's kind of like, both sides need to acknowledge that and be willing to have a conversation about it. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
So something interesting. So very recently, New York and New Jersey have agreed that now AAPI history is going to be taught in schools, right? Yay for us. And to be honest, I was not that excited about it. And it's not that I'm not excited for our history to, finally have a place in textbooks and classrooms. It's just that I know personally as a teacher, my hours are long. I'm up at 4:30. I get home close to 5:00 every day. That's over 12 hours, right? And now we're being force fed this curriculum that we're supposed to care about, and on top of a plate that's already overflowing. And so for me, this is great. Like I teach it every day anyway, right? I incorporate it into every single lesson of every day that I teach. In the month of May, I already have my curriculum down. Like I know what I'm doing in May for AAPI History Month. But outside of me, I don't know anyone else that's super excited about this new edition, right? And so I think, yes, it's great that finally our histories are going to be taught, but are they going to be taught the way we want them to be? No. Is there going to be enough care and tact put into the way they're taught? Probably not. And so, yes, it is one step forward, but I think people really have to sit back and think about the people behind those lessons. It's not always going to be someone that looks like you or me, right? And that's a reality that we also have to face. And the same thing could be said about the conversations that we're having. You and I can have a very productive conversation with anyone else, right? But there are other Asians and Asian Americans who would not be able to have like a level head, who already have like pre-biases and pre-notions about other ethnicities and people of different cultures. And so I think it also needs to be a conversation. I don't want to say that's like mediated, but maybe it needs to be. Maybe there needs to be a third party who's completely objective, who's like a moderator, who's there to kind of keep the peace. Because I feel like any conversation that kind of comes down to like culture and race is going to get heated at some point. And so at my age now, I've learned to just kind of listen and observe. I watch people's body movements. I'm very aware of my surroundings at all times, and I think I'm again like Stop Asian Hate that heightened my awareness. I would not leave my house without sunglasses. If you like looked through my social media, I have sunglasses on in almost every picture because of what was happening. But again, I think it's very hard to kind of like erase the mindset that you already have, right? Mm-hmm. And I think, did I have preconceived notions about others? 100%. But until you get to know someone or, you know, talk to somebody else and get outside of the social media world and actually have a face-to-face or, you know, a conversation like this, I think people are very protected behind their screens. And so once it becomes like a very real conversation, it can kind of go either way. It's either going to be super productive and both sides are going to listen, or it's going to be heated and it's just going to be fighting and going like this redundant circle.
The answer, I think, literally is that simple. Like, we need a mediator. I mean, literally. I mean, I don't even know why I didn't even think of that before. I've never even thought of that before. You know, I've always just wondered, like, what's it going to take for the, you know, the two communities to really be willing to talk to each other? Because like we already know, if you leave the two kind of just in a room together, it's not going to be a productive conversation, right? It's going to get heated. It's going to get emotional. People are seeing things from only their perspective, really. And, you know, which makes sense when you feel like there's a lot of grievances that you have against the other side and that hasn't been acknowledged or owned up to.
I also think that the media portrays it as a competition, right? Like, oh, Black people went through this. Well, oh no, did you know that Asians went through this? And oh, did you know that Hispanics went through this? And so it's not a competition, right? And I think that instead of comparing our hardships and our histories in a negative way, I think we can use those to kind of come together and say to ourselves, like, wow, we all went through like a whole bunch of X, Y, and Z. What can we do to come together to move forward? But again, that's a tough conversation to have because you are going to have people who are going to be like, well, this didn't happen to you. Well, that's great, but that's also not happening to you right now.
Yeah, exactly. I think though, having someone with an objective perspective, maybe it could be Oprah. I don't know. Someone with enough clout and respect for both communities. That might be what it takes, you know? But that's a really great idea, actually. So hopefully we can see something happen in our lifetime. Shifting gears just a little bit, I want to talk about your organization, actually, because that's how we know each other. That's kind of how we found each other. And right before, this interview, I had asked about your bio and you said you don't consider yourself an activist. So if you're comfortable, I'd like to actually, ask you why that is.
So I came home in 2019, the pandemic happened, and like most people, deathly afraid to leave my house, right? COVID was still an unknown thing. No one was sure it was happening. Hate crimes were, rising. And so I finally left my house. And the first protest that I actually attended was for Black Lives Matter. And then after that, they just kept coming. It was Black Lives Matter, Stop Asian Hate, immigrant workers, excluded funds, foundations, and stuff like that. But I think the reason that I don't consider myself an activist is because I honestly don't have the capacity. I think that if it was my full-time job, then I had enough bandwidth to organize more often and do more on the ground work, I think it would be different. In my eyes, I, show up when I can. Um, and I try to be a voice for those that either aren't able to show up or don't have the capacity to attend. In the very beginning, I just like stood in the back, didn't really know if I had a place there. And that goes back to me being adopted, because so many of the speakers, and like, would talk about their grandparents, their elders, and their families. And it could be my grandma. That wasn't my grandma. And so my grandma was Ukrainian. And so, and European. And so I almost felt out of place, as if I wasn't Asian enough to take up space there. And so that was something that I like kind of dealt with in the beginning of rallies and protests. But then at the end of the day, after like multiple conversations, this is who I am. I am Korean. I was born there, and no one will ever take that away from me. Whether I was born here or there, whether I'm adopted or not, this is my blood. This is who I am. And I think that's kind of when I found my voice and kind of became more unapologetically me.
Well, first of all, what you described as, what you do, which is giving a voice to the voiceless, that sounds like an activist to me. I don't know how else you would define it. And I think not being able to do it full time is not a reason to not credit yourself for that. Because I mean, it is hard to do it full time, but quite frankly, I think all of us, we do it in our own ways, right? I think, I've seen the Together We Are Stronger shirts on a lot of people. And that is a form of activism, in my opinion. You're spreading awareness about an issue that a lot of people still don't know a lot about, and you're trying to facilitate change through that. And that's interesting you say that about how you heard this like narrative about like people talking about their grandmas, and it's just like I have like the opposite reaction, where I felt like a lot of people were talking about that and Asians still kind of didn't give a shit, So it's like, I don't even think that's like a criteria to even really care, because there's still a lot of Asians who hear that and they've got Asian grandmas and I don't hear them speaking up. So if you are the person doing it, like, hell yeah, you are an activist. You do represent this community. Absolutely do not need to be qualified because of the fact that, your family, is adopted you. So I just want to put that out there, because I don't think that at all should make anyone feel like they don't have the right to be a part of this movement or to represent this movement. So you really have owned up to that part of your identity. You really wear it loudly and proudly now. What was the reasoning for, starting Together We Are Stronger?
So one of the earlier protests I had gone to, I made a very basic sign, and it had, American spelled out with the different Asian ethnicities.
Can we see a shirt, by the way? Because we are recording this, and it's going to go on YouTube. So
yes.
People should just see what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Oh, yeah.
And I guess like the cool thing, I mean, the thing that I think that I love about it the most is that it is my handwriting. And so literally no one can replicate it. It's my writing. And then however, I have gotten a lot of comments that I did not include the 40 other countries that are part of our diaspora, right? They tell you not to read the comments. And so the rally that I attended, a good friend, who's a good friend now, Cindy, short plug, Activist NYC, she posted this photo, kind of like there was like about 10 posts in a row. And for some reason, we still to this day, like don't know how this happened, but the one that she took of me got close to 25,000 hits.
Wow.
Yeah, it was kind of wild. Now I know how celebrities feel. I'm just kidding.
Hey, listen, that's how you get famous these days, by going viral anyways.
It was kind of like a wild, a whirlwind, like 2 weeks. I know Olivia Munn had reposted it, Jamie Chung, Francis Wong. And because Francis Wong had posted, or because Cindy had posted it, a lot of people in the comments had said, this would be great on a shirt. I had a friend who I met while I was traveling a couple months back, and he was like, we can do this. Let's print them and we'll sell them at cost. Like, we're not trying to make any money off of it. And I was like, let's do it. And so we would do them from home. We would make them from home. And I would just, if I wore it to a rally, people would ask where I got it. It was like a Venmo transaction. And so I would mail it to them at cost price. I was actually losing money because I was just like paying for shipping. But I didn't care. Like none of us cared. Because all we wanted to do was like spread awareness, uplift our cultures, and just make people aware. Like, yes, we might look different, but we're American. We fucking live here, and so that's kind of how that happened. And then the subsequent designs have all the designs on the website they come from signs that I have made personally. Like they're my artwork. And so I think that that's something that I pride myself on as well. And for all the people who say I don't include all of the countries, there are 31 other versions that will be released by the end of this year that include all of them.
Wow. That is incredible. Actually, yeah, because I think I saw like a second version of the shirt and with the different ethnicities listed. So I didn't realize you created 30 versions. That's very impressive. That's an amazing story. Thanks for sharing that. And can I just say, I just find something so Asian about the fact you got DM'd about the fact like of the other Asian.
The best part was someone was like, oh, you forgot Indonesia. And I was like, actually, I didn't. And I was there and I loved it. Like, when was the last time you were there? And they're like, oh, I've never been. Well, then why are you coming at me like, what?
Was this person Indonesian?
Yes.
Oh, that is like the thing about being Asian American. Cause like we all get like lumped under this label, right? And then whatever is considered Asian, or if there's like an initiative, Asian Heritage Month, or there's like, I don't know, a donation for an Asian organization. It's like, unless you're part of this world and this bubble, what people don't realize, like underneath, there's just a lot of like infighting going on, trying to speak up for like their own ethnic group and like their own interests. Like there is no camaraderie about it.
We're supposed to hate Japanese people. You know that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But even still, there's like, I mean, Korean people are very like racist to Chinese people too. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't tell you how many times my folks will be like, some of our favorite Korean restaurants, if the service has changed, like my mom or I feel bad about saying it, but it would just be like, I think the owner's Chinese, and that's just like enough to like be like, why she thinks the service has gone down. I'm just like, that's not right. That's like not right. As someone who works in business, but I do think though you do need to up your prices though. I think that's not a good business model. You should definitely be charging above cost.
Well, yes, now we do, because it kind of became too much. Mm-hmm. I would say something else that we're super proud of. We are in 4 continents. Wow. There are people from the NBA, the NFL, ESPN, multiple news networks that all have them. But the thing is I don't ask for pictures. If they would like to be posted on the Instagram page, that's great. If not, totally understandable. And again, because it's not about me, right? It's not about my digital artist who is Hong Kong Vietnamese. It's not about our original shirt printers who are natives of Puerto Rico. I was very intentional though that everyone was a person of color. That was something that I really wanted. And we all agreed with that. And I don't do a good job of marketing it because I know what my intentions are, right? And I just want to spread awareness. I want people to be proud of who they are and where they come from. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that I wasn't for such a long time. I was so embarrassed to be Asian. I was so embarrassed to be Korean. I was so tired of people pulling their eyes back and saying like horrible things to me that, and being adopted kind of made it easier for me to believe that I was white, that I was American, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, culturally in America, Asians are white adjacent, right? And so it took me so long to be proud that I would never want someone to feel that way, right? And like, yes, are there pros and cons to every culture? Of course. But at the end of the day, like, you're not going to change who you are. Like, this is inevitably who you are, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's so hurtful to be ashamed of that. And I think that was like a lot of our message was we have nothing to be ashamed about. Literally nothing to be ashamed about. Now we do make a small profit, but again, like that money goes back into the community. Whether it's we're raising funds for the Blasian March, Black Lives Matter, AAPI organizations. I partnered with East Side Stories earlier this year for their event in May. So yeah, just kind of, putting it back into the community.
I really applaud you for that, because, you don't have to do that either. You could totally just, keep those profits for yourself. But the fact that it's completely, being given back to the community, I think it's very commendable. And again, I think the shirts are great. So I'm excited to see how you guys expand and continue growing your message from that. Just in the time we have left, I want to talk about Korean Americanness with you. I feel that our community can do a better job at being involved with the larger conversations around anti-Asian hate. In New York City, Koreans, I believe, are the third or fourth largest Asian subgroup after Chinese, Indian, and maybe Filipino. I need to check my stats, but we're here is what I'm trying to say. And I remember, just a little bit about me is that, I grew up being very aware of the fact that Asians/Korean people were discriminated against because, so my mom came here when she was pretty young, actually. She came when she was in middle school. So she faced a lot of discrimination growing up. And she told me stories about it. Like her and my aunts, my mom has 3 sisters, they would have like rocks thrown at them on the playground. And, they came kind of at the tail end of, the Vietnam War, where there was very racist views about Asians because of, what the US went through with the Vietnam War. And, nobody knew what Korea really was. Mm-hmm. And she told me, she had to learn to fight back because my grandparents certainly didn't know how to handle what she was going through. And my mom, I think, recognizing that her daughters were going to go through something similar, being who we are, always taught us, this is how people will perceive you. And when they do, you need to say something. I did not have this typical Asian parent being like, keep your head down. And quite honestly, my grandparents are not like that either, even though they're typical Korean. Like they're very feisty too. Like we were not taught to be timid, right? So having like that early consciousness of it and feeling, obviously, I'm very proud to be Korean. We're both very proud to be Korean and, owning up to it. But I did feel when I showed up to these diversity initiatives, for the Asian, student population in college or something like that, I very rarely saw Korean people. It was always like Chinese and Southeast Asian. Like the Koreans did their thing. It was always like KSA, like Koreans, stuck together. But when it came to like more Pan-Asian initiatives, like I just didn't see as much Korean representation. And even this idea of like being aware of diversity and like talking about it and like talking about racism. I mean, I just felt I was a little bit different from some of my Korean American friends for being like so passionate about it. Cause it's almost like Korean to just not care about it, just to like be in your own bubble, just take care of yourself. So I think, what happened back in 2021 with Atlanta, that directly affected us. That was and I don't know if you were there. There was a rally in Union Square actually after Atlanta. And it was the largest rally I'd seen to date for anti-Asian hate. I mean, I saw more white people than Asian people there, which was surreal. And, they brought in a Korean pastor and a shaman, a Korean shaman to perform. It was a very Korean rally. They had a Korean lady speak, and she spoke in English first, but then she switched to Korean, and there was like a huge reaction from the crowd. Like people were really cheering her on. Like what she was saying in Korean was like, we need to start treating this country like it's our country. That's what she was telling the Koreans in the crowd. And she was saying it in Korean, but when she said that, I heard noise, and I've never heard Koreans like speak out about, racism or anything like that. So all that to say, I think, I feel like our community still needs to be more involved in like these larger conversations on anti-Asian hate. But I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Like going back to what you said. So after that rally, how many Koreans did you see after that?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's hard to track, right? Because like, okay, fine, maybe not a lot.
That was something that I noticed kind of like right away. I'm also, this is, I don't know how embarrassing this is, but I'm sometimes not really good at distinguishing us. um, I can generally, I would say like 90% of the time, I'm like, I can like identify a Japanese person, but
Oh, wow.
and a Korean, but sometimes like sometimes I'm just not that good at it, right?
Okay.
Because to be perfectly honest, if you looked at you and me, not many people would know that both of us are Korean, right? Because we look vastly different, like I mean, to the American eye, yes, we
Yeah,
look
yeah.
identical,
I see what
right?
you're saying, yeah.
But yeah, I would say I feel the same way. I felt like there was more a lot more Chinese and Chinese American out than Korean. And to be honest, at the AAPI parade earlier this year, I was shocked that there were so many Korean floats. I like jumped into the parade almost because I was so proud that they were in there. I jumped over like the gated barricade, did not care what the consequence was, and they let me, stand there and sit there. I was unbelievably proud that they were part of this. And I think Koreans do love their bubble. They love it. If you look at pockets of even New Jersey, so Fort Lee is a very highly populated Korean area. But then like outside of that is Teaneck and Tenafly and Palisades Park. Yes, still like a lot of Korean communities, but they don't really branch out outside of that. Right. So case in point, like I'm one of the only Korean people within probably, I don't know, like 10-mile radius. Right. And so I think culturally they like know, they like what's familiar. They like to know, or they like to be around familiarity. And so if that means sticking together and going to Korean church, then that's what that means. I also think that because so much of Korean culture is based upon education, and like, are you going to a math hagwon? Are you playing an instrument? Like, who cares if you're playing sports? Like, you need to like just be smart, smart, smart. Um, and I get this feeling because I taught rising freshmen just this past summer, a few months ago, and they were like 90% of them were Korean because they were from Fort Lee, and all they cared about was playing games on their phone and school. Like that's it. And so I don't know if that's part of the reason why they just are so closed off. But I would have to imagine that that plays a certain role. I was also kind of shocked about how they just didn't care. Right. And so it's interesting because the people that I've organized with have sometimes been half my age, right? They are freshmen and sophomores in college. And I'm just like, God, when I was a freshman and sophomore, all I cared about was like getting drunk and going to parties, right? I had no awareness of, or like very little awareness of like political things that were happening or even globally, right? And that goes back to how much access we have now, like in real time, to media and social media. And so I guess I thought that because I felt this way, that these Korean kids were going to feel this way too. And they could not give a shit less. Like they understood what racism, is. And yes, they've like encountered it like a little bit, but in terms of like wanting to do something about it, it wasn't there. And again, they're young, but I don't know. I thought because so many activists that I've met have been still in their teens, I was like, oh, there's hope. And then I taught them over the summer and they just didn't give a shit.
Wow. I mean, that doesn't surprise me. That's kind of concerning because like, I mean, if the younger generation still is showing that kind of apathy, then we have a ways to go. Right. Because I mean, when we were young, it wasn't being talked about really at all at this level, at least like no one would have been talking about it. Koreans, like we're very proud of our culture and our heritage, and we're very nationalistic, which, I think is a great thing. There's a lot to be proud of, right? I mean, the influence Korean culture has had like globally, I think is something to be really, really proud of. And just considering like Korea, the country's like the size of Indiana, right? Like, I think that sometimes comes at a cost because it's also kind of you're like, to your point, it's like we stay in our bubble a little bit too much. There's a sense of like, we can only, stick with ourselves, and we sort of only take care of ourselves only. And that sort of insular mindset is not going to get you far, at least in this country. I mean, we're part of the Asian pie, right? And if we don't play a role in those discussions on how to move like the Asian community forward, then in my opinion, we're not going to have any voice in the matter. And it should very much like affect us, right? Mm-hmm. Like we should bring our perspective and our issues, like as Koreans, into that, and speak up on that. But I don't think we're really doing that. And there's a lot of things that we should be speaking up about. It's our elders getting attacked. It's our business owners who still, are affected by like the ongoing, violence. And I kind of think also because Korean Americans are still very, very like tied to their roots more than a lot of like Asian countries. Like I think we feel a very strong affinity to the motherland still, that it's almost like what happens in Korea matters more than what happens here.
Korea is also very homogenous, very, very homogenous. And so I think, when you do come to a country like America, even a city, just like, let's just like zero in on Manhattan, yes, there are Koreans, but it's such a small part of like the greater population of Manhattan and New York City. And I think, again, like for me, I think that goes back to like, it's the fear of the unknown, right? Imagine coming to a country, you don't speak the language. There are people who don't look like you everywhere. And so I think your first instinct is to just kind of keep your head down and like stick to things that which kind of makes sense. But I also at the same time feel like right now and in the past like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, these conversations, they're not going away. They're not going away. And we cannot just rely on a political leader with an Asian face. Not naming any names, but we can't just vote for someone based on what they look like, right? We've seen how that's panned out. We're living through it right now. But like, I think people who are lazy, maybe lazy is the wrong word, who are not as invested because they think that it doesn't affect them. Right. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like people who think that they're not being affected or that they're not directly affected, just sweep it under the rug and kind of just let it happen because it doesn't affect their daily lives.
I totally agree with that. I do think though, I agree with the point about when you come here, you don't know the language or the culture, the fear of the unknown. It absolutely plays a role as to why the first generation wasn't able to advocate. Also, like when you're an immigrant too, I mean, that's not your first priority, right? Like your first priority is survival. But I think the second generation, quite frankly, like we don't have that excuse, right? We speak English. A lot of us speak English better than Korean. A lot of us grew up in this culture and we know it like better, honestly, probably than Korean culture if we were born and raised here our whole lives. I mean, I'm not trying to like compare here, but I was a bit disappointed when I saw a lot of my Korean American friends on social media. I saw them like speak out more about what happened in Itaewon than I did about what's been happening to Asian elders all year. And some of these Asian elders were Korean too. And I just find it a little interesting that they felt more moved by that when they don't even live in Korea. And they felt so moved by what happened in Itaewon. But like what's happening here to like Asian Americans is not something like I see them speak up about, Yeah, I think as Korean Americans, we really do need to also accept, the US is our home. And that doesn't mean denying or giving up what makes us, Korean and what gives us our roots. But I do think hopefully like the community as a whole, starts to step up and speak up and just be involved. And I'm not saying that there aren't people who do it. There are, but I don't think as a community we've kind of come together and done that. I want to ask you one final question. What gives you hope with everything that's going on? What makes you keep fighting for the community, or what makes you keep wanting to speak up for this community? And what's one call to action that you would want to say to the Asian American community?
So the first part, I think what keeps me going and what I'm hopeful for, being a teacher is one of the most underappreciated jobs you could have, right? And so I'm clearly not in it for the money. And I truly believe that if I can get through to maybe 1 to 5 students a year, I would consider that a success. And so I see the difference that I'm, able to make in my students' lives. That's what keeps me going. I don't have kids of my own. And so I do, tend to treat them as if they are my own. I think just knowing that they're coming out of school each day learning something new, right? And so that doesn't necessarily mean that they learn a new math strategy or they've read a new book. It could be that they've learned something new about Native Americans because November is Native American Heritage Month, right? So we're teaching them that. And I think it's all of the missed opportunities that I had as a kid that I don't want that cycle to continue. And so I think like that is kind of something that drives me every day. And it doesn't get repetitive like people would think because, each new school year is a new group of students that, have their eyes wide open and they're like ready to receive all of this worldly information.
Yeah.
If I could tell the Korean community or the Asian community something, I think a call to action would honestly to be kind. I know that that's very cliche. It's very simple. It's maybe not the answer you're looking for. But I just think that people as a whole need to be kind. We wake up in a world that is in constant turmoil, right? And there are some days that it's so hard to find something to even be remotely happy about or to be grateful for. And I think it's because we live in this world where we need and want instant gratification, right? We order something from Amazon, we want it like today. We want it in your hand in like an hour. And that's just not what happens. And I think that change is slow. Like take the good or the bad with it. It's not going to happen overnight. People can say that, right? And they can say, oh yes, change is slow, but I think it's another thing to actually believe it. And so I think as long as we keep that in mind, and if you can just do something so small as to hold the door open for somebody else, I think kindness sincerely goes a long way. I think I've been very fortunate to meet people like you and our mutual friend through shit circumstances. I met you guys under horrible times, right? But at the same time, I was also able to forge relationships that are super meaningful. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if it wasn't for something like this.
If you've been following us throughout the series, we thank you. Our mission with Tiger in the Room is to facilitate in-depth discussions on the ongoing violence and racism against Asian Americans. What is causing it? Why is it continuing? And what can be done to stop the violence? Since the start of COVID-19, we have noticed certain narratives being pushed by the mainstream media, politicians, and even members of our own community that were not addressing the nuances and difficult questions. Why are so many members of our community apathetic? Why is it so hard for Asians to come together? Why are certain hate crimes covered and others aren't? Why is such a low number of registered assaults being prosecuted as hate crimes? And what are some tangible policies that we should be asking our politicians on behalf of our community? These are some of the questions we have asked our guests this season, as well as ourselves. We encourage you, our listeners, to also continue these conversations with yourselves and with other folks in your community and networks to ask how you can better support the Asian community and raise awareness about the ongoing violence and racism that our community still faces today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.